Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Digital Marketing Show in the Mobile Theatre, sponsored by Sitecore. I'd like to make sure that Richard has got his microphone working. So I'd like to introduce you to Richard Firminger. Is that correct pronunciation?
It's Firminger, but don't worry. I'm not
Sorry.
bothered.
I like this bit. Managing Director of Europe, but then there's a comma of Managing Director of Europe for Flurry. Richard leads the company's UK office as well as advertising sales and publisher relations across Europe. I like these bits as well. Prior to Flurry, Richard led the digital marketing sales for Amazon in Europe. And prior to that, he was commercial director for North Europe in Yahoo and MD for nPocket. So a lot of wealth of information here. And today he's talking about, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your audience is? Over to you.
Thanks. Thanks for the intro. Can you all hear me? I know it's an open forum here. So if you're sitting here wanting to know what's going on in the smart device world and everything inside apps, you're in the right place. If you're not interested in the revolution of what's happening on phones and tablets and how we're consuming content, then this next half an hour is going to be completely lost on you. So feel free to get up and walk out and say, no, I don't want to listen to this guy talk about the app content revolution. So that's specifically what I'm going to be talking about. Anyone heard of Flurry from those sat down or listening to me at the back? Hands up if you've heard of Flurry. Wow, that's amazing. But not surprising. We're the world's largest analytics provider for app developers. So if you produce apps, you definitely know Flurry because you will more than likely use our analytics software. We now track over 400,000 apps for about 125,000 companies, and we see active mobile devices of around 1.2 billion. If you're wondering how many of the universe is it, it's about 90%. So put another way, 9 out of 10 smart devices around the world, including tablets, have our software in it, which is about 400 million more than Facebook and about 600 million more than Google, and no one in this auditorium has heard of us. What that allows me to do is stand here with some credibility, because what we're talking about here is real data, watching smart devices, watching those 1.2 billion devices a month. So it's not taking a very small sample size and extrapolating that up to the population. It's actual data, it's raw data, it's looking at every device and what they're doing in apps. So those 400,000 are some of the very, very big apps in the world. We track for Angry Birds, we track for the Huffington Post, for Skype, for Shazam, for Snapchat, for Pinterest, for Tumblr, for The Guardian, for The Economist, for The New York Times, for Fruit Ninja, for Cut the Rope, and the list goes on and on. So it's very difficult to buy your smart device, your tablet, and start downloading apps and not download at least one that has our software. And that analytics is very powerful. It gives you usage data, so you can know how many users you've got, what your retention looks like, your frequency, your session length. You can build events, so that's any completed action, user paths. So for an app developer, it's a free tool. We monetize another way, which I'll explain. But it's a free tool, and it's very, very important that you understand how your app is being used in the wild once you've given it to Apple or Google or the other stores in the world. We use that data to power two parts of our business. That sounds like a jumbo jet landing, doesn't it? First up was our ad network. So inside some of those apps, they allow us to put in ads, banners, takeovers, and video. And they're primarily used as performance basis for achieving more downloads. So often we call it a circle because it's developers trying to win new consumers, new installs off other developers. AppSpot is much newer. It's an ad-serving platform. An iteration of that is Flurry Marketplace, which is a real-time bidding platform. And I know if you've sat through the previous presentation from AdPhonic are one of our buyers on the Flurry Marketplace. Thank you for your business. And we're seeing a huge, huge uptick. This is an uptick in events. An event inside an application is anything that you do that the developer wants to use Flurry to track that completed action. That might be a level in a game. It could be sharing on Twitter. It could be going to a product detail page in a travel app. It could be the weather page for Barcelona. It could be any completed action. And we're seeing now over 3 trillion of those events a month. And we're seeing a huge surge in the number of events that we're actually tracking across those 400,000 apps. And there are there are apps and categories that are much more mature in terms of app presence than others, and the music industry was one of the first. In actual fact, if you look at today's UK Apple Store and US Apple Store, Pandora is the top 3 top grossing application around the world. So we can see that some of these music apps are really making a ton of money from subscription and or ad funded. The games industry and the smart device has really brought games to almost everyone. And I know in this room you're probably going to reflect and say, yeah, I now play games, but before I had a smart device, I didn't. And again, if you look at the top charts, you can see Candy Crush. There are a few. If I ask you whether you play Candy Crush, you're going to lift your hands, I'm assuming. Who plays Candy Crush? Mostly female, which is exactly right. Weirdly, Candy Crush is very popular with females. Around 75% of all Candy Crush users are actually women. So you'll be playing Papa Pear Saga fairly shortly. Anyone heard of Papa Pear Saga? The next sister to Candy Crush? You'll be playing it soon enough, as I bet you've now started to play Pet Rescue Saga as well. So actually casual games have brought gaming to everybody. No longer is gaming the domain of spotty teenagers on their Xbox or PS4s. Gaming has really brought entertainment to the masses. And so you can use lots of examples right the way through this uptick in terms of events. And even retail, we're now shopping and browsing and purchasing items in our mobile devices far more than we ever have before. We also see an amazing increase over the last quarter of the number of apps being created. And we can see the number of apps being created because each time they create a new app, they put our software in it. And if you look at this last quarter, Q3, compared to Q1 of 2012, that's nearly double the number of apps being created for you to enjoy in the stores, which is a phenomenal new revolution in app content creation. We thought that last year was a crazy, crazy year for the number of apps that are in the stores that we could choose from. We're actually seeing now twice the volume of apps being created than there was 18 months ago. And goodness knows what I'm going to be saying in 18 months back here, because we saw 37,000 apps being created in 12 weeks. We see days where there are 1,500, 2,000 apps being created in a day. And that's just what Flurry sees. We obviously don't see all apps, but we see a good proportion. So there's a phenomenal acceleration in the number of apps that we all get to choose from in the stores. And if you're unsure how many apps there are to choose from, there's about 1 million. And everyone's chasing a chart position. And I speak to a lot of developers and a lot of brands, a lot of people that are thinking about creating apps and say, okay, but I'm competing with another 1 million unique pieces of content, and I want to get into the top 5. How on earth do they do that? And the numbers are enormous. So if you actually look at the US store, which is the largest single store for app downloads in the world, it's not the largest for active smart devices, but it is the largest in terms of the number of app downloads from that particular market. You can see to be number 1 in the US App Store today, per day, on average you need 281,000 installs. And you probably need the same number every day from that day forward to maintain your position as number 1. To get to number 10, you're actually looking at get into the top 10, you're looking at an average of 83,000 installs to be in the top 10 for the US store. And so people often ask companies like Flurry, how on earth do I achieve that? Well, unless you're really lucky, or unless you have an amazing app, or unless you have an amazing successful app that you can cross-promote with, unless you have an amazing successful app that you can cross-promote with, and Apple loves you and will always feature you. So Natural Motion are a great example of a publishing house that have really developed some great traction and a great relationship with Apple. Clumsy Ninja has just launched in the US this week and has achieved a phenomenal number of millions and millions of installs already in the first few days, principally because it got featured on the Apple Store. Another way of looking at it is how many apps achieve at least 1 million monthly actives. How many reach that milestone that we actually look at? The answer is around 875, which is specifically 875 that we've seen that reached at least a million monthly actives. If you look at an even higher tier, like 20 million monthly actives, that number drops down to 32. But if you're depressed by that number, 32 is actually 5 times the number of apps that generated 20 million monthly actives the previous year. So actually we're seeing a larger number of very large apps at the very head of the tail. Another slightly depressing figure, and I don't wish to depress you on this day, but of all the major apps, so the major apps that have achieved at least 1,000 installs, nearly all of them lose half their audience after the first 30 days. And if you track that through to the first 12 months, that's 96%. So most app developers, most of the time, lose nearly all of their users within the first 12 months. Because there's so much promiscuity, because there's so much trialing going on, because there's so much choice, because we always want to evolve and try new stuff. But there are some apps that stay with us probably forever. And if you look at this, this matrix, the vertical is the number of times you open an app in a week, and across the bottom is retention, rolling retention from 20% to 60%. The bottom right is a pretty neat place to be. Bottom left is a pretty struggled place to be. It's a pretty difficult place to be. But if you look at the very corner, bottom left, personalization, these are your one-and-done apps. So ringtones apparently is still a multi-billion-dollar industry, believe it or not. But a ringtone or changing your screen actually is something you're going to do once and then stop. If you look at the top right, dating, highly intense usage, but not for very long. So you're seeking instant gratification. A much younger friend of mine was talking about Tinder this morning and how he's using Tinder. He's single. And I'm just so pleased I'm not in that demographic anymore. Swiping left for the ones you like, swiping right for the ones you don't, and then clicking on the ones you want to have a conversation. Conversation starts, and then you can meet within 20 minutes. It's scary stuff. But that type of usage happens fairly intensely until you've achieved whatever you want to achieve. You've met your partner for life. You've met your partner for the evening. So you can see dating's in the top right. Dating top left. Top right, actually something like communication. So instant messenger, VoIP. We use those a lot, frequently a week. So I use Skype or Vonage or Viber almost every day. And I use it intensely every week. And I'll probably use it for the rest of my life because this is a new way of communicating. Again, another example of how apps are disrupting the world. The bottom right are things like casual games, news, scores, utilities. These are the apps that are probably going to stay with you for the rest of your life. You're probably going to open them a number of times a week, and you're going to stay loyal to that. It might be the Met Office. It could be train times. It could be casual games. It could be sports scores. So you're going to open and use. It could be the Guardian. Could be the Sun. Could be the Mirror. These are the sort of apps that you're going to open frequently, most weeks for the rest of your life. We're seeing also a phenomenal growth around the world, and some markets are much more mature. Look at North America, Western Europe, and Australia. The compound annual growth of the number of active devices is actually slowing because all of that growth has happened previously. We reported earlier this year that China became the largest smart device market in February. It's just about 290 million active devices, and because of its sheer size of population, just over 1 billion. Actually, China will remain the largest active smart device market in the world, probably forever. There are other markets like South Korea that have almost no compound annual growth because everyone that's going to have got a smart device has got one. The only growth can be in second and third and fourth devices. I know this is a lot of data, by the way. If you want this data, then this presentation, then just write to me, richard@flurry.com. You can say great presentation or rubbish presentation. I'll give you the deck anyway. If you want some of this data and you want to read more, blog.flurry.com gives you all of these and many, many other insight reports. So richard@flurry.com, blog.flurry.com. Also, the good news is that we're using a lot more apps that are produced outside the US than inside the US. Again, there's a common misnomer that only those apps produced in the US are the ones that are dominating. And for the first time this year, we're seeing that actually there are more apps being in use and being activated, produced outside the US than inside. And you can see in Europe, we really are killing it. I've mentioned some of those, like Hey Den and Clash of Clans from Supercell. Interestingly, they just sold 49% of their company for 1.5 billion. So that values them at around 3 billion. 3 billion for 2 games. That's pretty awesome. If you speak to the guys at King, they're looking forward to an IPO, and that IPO is looking like it's going to be valued in the company somewhere between 5 and 7 billion. Yes, I said 5 and 7 billion, but if you look at the charts, Candy Crush, Pet Rescue, and soon to be Papa Pear, they are phenomenally successful apps. Candy Crush is one of those phenomenons that we have seen this year and last year, incredibly successful. Then if we look more locally, actually, this is a measure of usage by where the app was created. And in the UK, only 13% of the time we spend in apps were produced by UK developers. And actually, if you look at Brazil, that's only 8%. So actually, where the app is produced and the time we spend in it are often not the same. And because of the cultural and language differences in China, so that right-hand graph, actually 64% of time spent in apps is actually made by Chinese developers. That tells you there's a phenomenal opportunity, albeit a difficult one, but time spent localizing apps, making them culturally significant and Chinese looking, and translating them to Chinese could pay enormous dividends, as we're seeing the world's largest smart device market consuming apps like never before, yet the majority of them are consumed and made by Chinese developers. Europe's growing very fast. Europe compound annual growth is 91% compared to an average of worldwide of 84%. Most of the major markets are growing by at least 40%, but there are some much more mature markets and less mature. Italy's growing at 120%, and that's connected devices that we see year on year. This is, again, a scatter graph of devices per head along the bottom. So if there's 0.5 devices per head, that's at least one device per 2 population. So you see Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, and Sweden, relatively small population, but a very deep penetration of devices per head of population. UK's got a relatively low penetration per head of population, but because of our size, we are the largest connected device market in Europe. And then conversely, you can see Italy has a low penetration and a low installed base, so that's why it's playing catch-up. It's now growing at 120%. So I hope you're all still with me. I think I'm about 2/3 the way through. So I know there's a lot of slides, a lot of data, so do bear with me. But I'm hoping at least you're learning a ton about what's going on in smart device and app usage. We also wonder about how much time do we spend, and this is session time, relative to mobile web and to app. And actually the answer is that 90% of the time we spend consuming content is actually inside apps. And a lot of people have come up to me after these types of presentations where I've used this stat, and they said, surely that's not true. I visit a lot of mobile web pages. You probably do, but you probably spend a very quick amount of time in those mobile web pages. But actually, if you reflect on the number of times you might be on the BBC iPlayer or playing your favorite casual game or on Facebook, the actual dwell time that we spend on those, especially in the evening, is an awful lot longer. So actually 90% of the time we spend consuming content is in-app. And app time is generally considered to us to be all the time. The significant upsurge in the time we spend in apps starts at about 7 in the morning and is pretty heavy usage all day. You can also see that there's that classic evening peak time surge of app usage, and an awful lot of that is games. But an awful lot of it increasingly is TV. If you're wondering when the mobile TV is coming along, for a vast chunk of audiences, the mobile TV is already here. It's your tablet, it's used by teenagers, and it's in the bedroom. So we're already seeing a dramatic change in the way in which we're consuming TV, albeit that linear TV on average is still about 80%, 85% of all usage is still when the TV broadcaster intends you to watch it. And those really big shows like X Factor, everyone wants to watch it at the same time, so you can tweet and you can be on Facebook commenting on it. But you can see that around 40% of time spent in the evening in apps is actually on games. So I'm just going to talk about the advertising business for a while. I mentioned that Flurry monetizes its data through advertising, making it more powerful, making it more targeted, hopefully making publishers more revenue per user and making advertisers find their audiences more easily. And there's a dramatic shift in the way in which you can buy in mobile advertising. And that shift has generally trended from searching for the right context, the right demographic, maybe the right time of day, the right country, really into a much more specific bidding each impression for each impression. And the advertising relationship between buyer and seller is also significantly changing. So the power lunch is giving away to the power of data. And whereas we used to sort of spend a lot of time negotiating contracts, doing upfronts, negotiating your discounts, signing the contract, and committing to a certain amount of revenue or certain budget with media owners, now we're just bidding impression by impression in real time. And Flurry Marketplace launched about 3 months ago, and we're seeing a significant shift in the dynamic in the way in which advertisers are buying and finding audiences inside mobile apps. And one of the ways they're doing it is through personas. Because we track so many apps, because we track so many devices, we're trying to profile each device by the time they spend in verticals, the time they spend inside applications. And it's really easy to tell a sports fan because they spend a lot of time in sports apps. Not a lot of time overall, but a lot of time indexed against the average. So this is an example. We can tell business travelers really easily because they spend a lot of time in flight times, in flight booking, in car rental, in weather apps, in currency conversion. We can see really easily that they're clearly a business traveler. And a business traveler will also only qualify if that activity is 25 times the average in the last 30 days. And a device can be in multiple personas. And we've built 34 personas from young mums to business travelers to sports fans to fashionistas and the such like. And then we're looking at those compared to how much time they spend elsewhere and trying to help advertisers and planners and buyers make some crafty decisions about where to find their audiences. And here's a couple of examples. Actually, if you want to find sports fans, don't look in sports content because they only spend 3% of the time actually in sports content. You've got to be more creative and try and find those sports fans elsewhere. Actually, over half the time of a sports fan in-app is actually spent in games. If you look at value shoppers, actually, you think value shoppers might be socially networked and actually spend a lot of time on social networks. Actually, it's not true. Only 20% or 18% of their time is actually spent in social networking sites. But again, another 35% is spent in games. So I've just got a couple more slides. And this is looking at, so I'm just going to flick between these and just make a couple of comparisons. This is different personas on iOS, and the next one is Android. But it's the same personas along the bottom. So you just look at the dramatic difference in time spent in games between mums on Android and iOS. I'm just going to flick back. 71% of mums spend their time in games on iOS, but that's not true in Android. I don't know quite why that is, but this is how we track personas against each of the categories. So it means you've got to have a different planning strategy if your target audience is mums. If your target audience is the main household purchaser from Android to iOS. Look at another quirk here, avid runners on the right-hand side there. Again, you're actually looking at avid runners spend the majority of the time in games on Android, so it's over 50%, but actually that's less in iOS. But what are avid runners doing spending all this time in games? You'd think they'd be far too busy getting fit. But their downtime is actually spent in games. So again, it really helps, our data helps planners and buyers and marketers think, well, my key target audience, I know, are people interested in fashion and in sports and in music. How do I find those? Where do they spend their time? And how can I organize my planning and my optimization and my measurement tools to really find those target audiences? That's kind of why we produce this data. The final slide is quite a shocking comparison between mums and young mums compared to the time spent on iPhone relative to iPad. Now, the quick ones amongst you will realize, aha, the time that mums spend in the tablet is not actually time that mum spends, it's time that the children spend on their mum's device. And that is probably true. We can tell a mum by their app profile. They'll have things that are useful to them as a mum, but also they'll have lots of children's apps. And it's really easy to tell a device by the profile of their apps. But actually, if you then say, well, actually, I don't want to reach mums, I actually sell prams, I need to reach young mums. I need to reach mums right at the early part of the shopping journey when it comes to buying all those things as you become a mother. Actually, over 90% of the time is actually spent on the phone. Maybe that's because there's only one hand free or what have you, but you can see that actually the difference in time spent across those two devices, mums and young mums, is extraordinarily different. And then generally just a last slide on a review of, last couple of slides on the review of where you should be investing your money. And the banner gets a really poor rep, and it's probably true. The banner on the desktop was never very good, so what on earth are we putting the banner in a phone or a tablet? It's probably true, and I'm hoping there's some really clever sods out there that are going to find those scalable native formats. So what I mean by native is that they fit within that app experience, but they're scalable, because when often I talk to ad agencies, yes, I do want that native experience, but I don't want to build a gazillion different creatives, bless you. And I don't want to have to build something different from each app publisher. I need my content to scale across many, many apps. So then obviously you have video. Video has been exploding in terms of its consumption and its growth, and the number of publishers enabling brand and app developer advertising via video. Rich media, brand integration, obviously branded app promotion. So you can see that diametrically one is cheaper and the other is more expensive, and probably your reach runs across that graph too. Your reach is far greater on scalable standard formats than it is in a native environment. But you should definitely track as much as you can. Going back to that scenario about the number of apps, there's 1 million, how do I get in the top charts? About 2 years ago and last year, I was taking a lot of ad revenue from people chasing those charts. I want to buy as many installs as I can this weekend, Richard, because I want to influence chart position. That kind of is a bit of a sort of, it's a false dawn, it's a fool's gold, it's just a false marketing approach, because you really need to spend incredibly large amounts of money. I've shown you the numbers to get in the top charts. Actually, and that's a bit of an art, you know, the difference between affecting chart position on Google Play relative to the Apple Store are very different. Google takes a much more black box algorithmic approach. But thankfully, that art is definitely giving way to some science. And whatever you track, you should track the relative value from the sources of your traffic. And Flurry has a free product called User Acquisition Analytics. It's a rubbish name. There's HasOffers and AdX and Conchava and Appsalar. None of these companies really existed about 18 months ago. And what it does, it helps you measure the relative value of your traffic by where you bought it. So if you bought traffic from AdMob, Google's ad network, or from Flurry, or from Chartboost, or from iAd, Apple's ad network, you want to know, well, my key quality metric is those that go on to make at least one in-app purchase, go on to get to at least level 5, spend at least 4 minutes in my app over the first week. Whatever that quality metric is, I want to measure by relative quality by where I bought the traffic. So you can see that you can track that source, you can evaluate the user quality, you can optimize acquisition budget, and then you can analyze long-term performance. And we're really pleased, obviously, Flurry is an analytics company. It's all about data. It's all about science. And marketers are getting much more scientific about how you buy traffic, how you buy installs, and then measuring that so that you can really optimize it for the long term. So with that, that's all I have. Thanks very much. Do I take questions? I don't know.
Yes, I was just about.
Oh, okay.
I got interrupted. Thank you very much. Anybody got any questions at all? Well,
Stunned you all into silence.
I'm gonna. While you're thinking about that, what are the next? What's the future for the next 6 months? What's the barriers to entry for Flurry? Yeah,
so I think I mentioned ad spaces and do banners fit in apps and arguably not, but at least it's a scalable ad unit. But I think we've got to be more creative about how we advertise to users without it being intrusive and it complement the experience. I think probably targeting. So at the moment, you know, even in real-time bidding, we're bidding blind for impression, and we really want to bid for our targeted audiences and those that we know are much more likely to be customers. So I mentioned the example about Candy Crush. So the King know that if they acquire a female user, they're much more likely to turn into long-term customers. So there's an example of where targeting, I think, really needs to scale for it to be. And this whole sort of native versus standard units, I think, we've got to work that out so that it is native, it fits the user experience, but it's also scalable.
And the other question about personas, very interesting about that. Are you getting clients who are saying, look, that's just too many personas, or are you saying we want less or do more? You know, I want to know, actually, the real thing is, how do you get to the magic 35? And could you add more, or was it less?
Actually, we did a sample of about 1,000 media briefs, and we looked at the personas that came up most commonly on the media briefs that we all get from ad agencies, and we built them that way. But we're building new ones all the time. We built cat lovers last week for one of the big cat food manufacturers.
So in that answer, then, there's more specialist personas growing all the time.
Yeah, and we can build them on the fly pretty quickly. We just say, okay, how do we define cat lovers? Well, actually, I'll tell you, we search for any apps that have got the description cat in them. Safe to say that if you're playing cat apps, you're a cat lover. And the buyer said, yep, that definitely works. The one thing we wanted to be able to do is track users in cat apps. You know, because there are a lot of cat apps. Did you know that the image of a kitten is the most distributed image in the world on social networking today? And my friends seem to love it, and they seem to think it's entirely appropriate to send pictures of the cats around to everyone else.
You can take that one to the
Can
pub
I just
tonight.
ask everyone in the room to stop it? It's irritating me. But they also know that cat lovers don't spend that much time in cat apps, but they want to find cat lovers wherever they are. And that's how personas come into play. So, yeah, we are building for marketers new personas all the time, and actually private personas. So we'll build a persona for a bank that's specific to that bank and probably not make it widely available.
Well, I've asked enough questions. Anybody else got any questions? If not, then I'm sure Rich is available afterwards. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you.